In a sense, I'll be asking you not just to be thinking of writing powerful little stories or poems that stand on their own, but also to be looking for how those stories might fit together with others, perhaps for a chapbook of short shorts or prose poems, perhaps as part of a much longer project, a book of poetry or short stories, or even a novel. You probably won't write an entire book this semester, but you might have a much better idea about the book you want to write, say, for your thesis, based upon the stories or poems you've written this semester. As a part of my writing in a non-linear fashion, even when I'm mostly known as a linear realistic writer, I tend to use mind maps to help explore what I want to write and then to organize what I've written into a coherent whole. Here, for example, is a map of a chapbook of short stories I've recently been sending out. It's a simple mind map showing a large number of the short shorts I've already published, but focusing only on those that I think fit together best, my yes, no, and maybe choices for the best stories with the greatest chances of being published as a chapbook. Such an exercise can be incredibly helpful in beginning to see not just discrete parts of a book you want to write, but the book as a whole. The map growing as the small destinations grow with it, headlights pointing onward through the fog. Here, for example, is a mind map of a story collection I'm currently working on. One novel project I've been working on has grown from this mind map to the mind map on the right, and I have another novel project I'm working on in a mind map to the left. Many of the brackets showing here short pieces I've already written as I've discovered what my books are about. I tend to move back and forth between many projects based upon what I feel most compelled to write, and I found that works best for me. Everyone's writing process is different, and perhaps your process is much different, and probably a lot less complicated. In any case, I see this as a method of being able to move back and forth between forest and trees, the micro and the macro elements of story and structure, and still to keep my focus on what's most important in the present as I write. Because it's easy to get a bit scattered multitasking on so many different projects at once. At present, I'm working on just one project to finish it. But when I have ideas for other projects, I write them down, all the stories I have yet to write or rewrite. And when I'm done with one project, I move on to the next, always the one that burns most brightly in my belly. Ultimately, I see the short story and the prose poem not just as ends in themselves, pieces I can and have published in literary journals and anthologies, but potentially as parts of longer, more fully developed projects. Meanwhile, I also find that they help me in the day-to-day discovery of where I'm going, what I'm most obsessed with moment by moment, giving me a chance to move a certain direction in a map I create and change as I write ahead. I may think that I'm driving to San Francisco at the beginning, but I may end up visiting Sequoia National Park instead, staring up at the giant redwoods. Such maps help to know where we're going in the short term, but because they're fluid, they can take us to places full of surprise and self-discovery. If we're not surprising ourselves as writers moment to moment, then we're probably not surprising our readers either. And if our surprises aren't in some ways inevitable, they're probably just cheap tricks, accidents and coincidences and acts of God or the writer that don't arise from character and therefore seem superficial, even absurd. As I've suggested earlier, writing short shorts or prose poems has become a powerful device that I've integrated into my writing process over many years. Part of the reason why I use them so much to get started is that I'm almost too well trained as an editor, and the editor in my head, the somewhat obsessive, compulsive, perfectionist bully who believes he knows everything and really knows little more than how to cut words, sentences, paragraphs, sections, and move them around, is not much of a writer, an awful writer, really. And he needs to get out of the way when I'm flying through a draft of a story. When I set my watch for 15 minutes and tell the editor to go off and clean up his own room for a change, childlike spontaneity returns and I find myself writing things I simply can't take credit for. My muse, whoever she is, gets the credit because she's the one who knows everything I don't, who hands me pretty sentences that don't sound too frilly or prosy. The beauty of the short form, especially spontaneously written short pieces, is that they can become the kernel of much longer stories, scenes, chapters, and even book-length projects. One of my students, for example, has published a novel based upon a short that she wrote in my class years ago. One simply sits down and writes these short pieces quickly without self-consciousness, the great enemy of spontaneous performance, as if one were performing a little jazz improv. Since I'm a jazz drummer, I know how to do this, how to fall into the music, but with writing it's a bit more difficult. Once a writer has written a draft, she may put these short pieces away to revise them again and again, developing them as little crafted gems or as part of longer, more complex projects. When working on such long projects, some writers, and I promise you I'm not one of them, have the ability to spend days, weeks, months, even years writing without the urge or even the need to revise. And some writers, again not me, have the ability to write with great spontaneity and create works of unparalleled genius without much need to edit on a large scale. I envy such writers, but I've accepted that I'm a slow, plodding writer like the turtle in the race with the hare, and that's the best way for me to write without making a great many wrong turns in my narratives. In a sense, I have to write quickly with great spontaneity first, and then I have to slow down to consider whether each move or turn in the story I'm writing is leading me in a direction I find credible and surprising. That is, that I'm not making easy moves. It's a slow process, but it's the way I work, and it often means not having to cut entire chapters or sections of books later. My friend novelist Valerie Miner has a completely different process. She writes out an entire novel in longhand on a legal pad, then types it into her computer. Then, so she isn't tempted to return to it, she prints out the novel draft and erases the file on her hard drive. "What?" I said when I told her this. "Are you crazy?" "No," she said, and smiled. She sits down and edits the manuscript, and then she retypes the entire novel again, following this process, she says, about 8 times. The process works for her, retyping an entire single book-length project without revision, then doing it all over again, she says, because she has to run the novel through her fingers again one more time. Whatever works, right? Such writers can write forward day after day, as each arrow represents above, and keep going without significant blocks. But not this writer, I confess. I get blocked more than most writers. So I have a completely different process, one born out of great frustration, much work, and trial and error.